Well, we appreciate the opportunity, and we have some fun things to take you through tonight, and there's 8 of them, so we probably don't want to dally too much. Well, maybe what you should do, why don't you take the first glass, or pour. If you've only got one glass, I suppose, you're going to have to put it to good use over the course of the tasting. But this is our, I guess, our welcome dram. This should be the Boutique Speyside number 4 24-year-old, which is a Glenlivet single malt. It doesn't say Glenlivet on the bottle. We'll get to that in a minute, but Slàinte, everybody. Cheers. Thanks for joining us. We don't want you to wait too long to have that first dram. While that's sort of resting on your palate, warming it up, getting it ready for 8 cask strength whiskeys, maybe just give you a quick background on our single casks, why they're such a big deal for us as well. We do more single casks, I think, than any other retailer, at least in Canada. And when we started doing them, it wasn't my business at the time. We had to be very choosy. If it didn't sell, my boss wouldn't let me buy another. After it became my business, I still had to pay her out. So choosing casks was still we were very cautious about it. We would often push back, ask for new samples if we didn't find anything worthy of bottling, push back on pricing, because we wanted it to be something that we could sell, something that we were excited about, but something that we felt was good value and that consumers would purchase. And we're now like 160 plus casks in that we've bottled. Some of them have been small, like 80 to 90 bottles, but most of them have been 200 to 500 bottles. So we've done a lot of casks, and what's happened over time is people, especially outside of Calgary, people who can't come visit us in the shop and try them, recognize that we don't put our name on anything we don't stand behind. And it's taken 17 years to build up that credibility. It's something that's very fragile, and we're not just going to bottle something and put our name on it because we know people will buy it. It's not how that works. It's got to be good. It's got to be good value. And if it's not, we won't bottle it. And increasingly, there's been a lot of things we've been turning down because maybe the liquid's not good enough, maybe the price isn't where we need it to be, or maybe we just don't think there's a demand for it. And the other element to this that I should mention is we don't always pick casks that are, my favorite or Evan's favorite. We really look at these things from the standpoint of what do our customers want? What do we think they're going to want? And trying to pick things that are interesting, cool, and that you can't get anywhere else. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we do and what's unique. And to the point again about clubs and tastings, I'm not really interested as a retailer in selling you stuff you can buy from your local shop just because maybe it's cheaper or what have you. We want to sell you the stuff that you can't get anywhere else. That's what we do. That's our business, and that's what we love. So, Evan, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that before we crack on the first.
Yeah. So that's just to tag on what Andrew said. Like most of you guys know this, but we're one store in a very open market which is Alberta. So doing all these store selected casks and getting the exclusives we get, such as Daft Mill and a few other things, and working closely with the likes of Gordon and MacPhail and that boutique whiskey company and Berry Brothers and Rudd, that's kind of what keeps us relevant more than anything else. We could very much be just drowning in the sea of releases that every other store gets, and there'd be not a whole lot of reason to shop with us because we don't have the buying power that other places do to get the special stuff in that way. But luckily, thanks to Andrew and his continuing work on sort of creating and developing and continuing to have good relationships with a lot of the independent bottlers out there, we get a lot of stuff that just doesn't offer to a lot of other people because of that.
Well, and yeah, as you said, Evan, part of that is because we expressed an interest in it back when no one was interested in it. And part of that was because when I started, and we'll talk, maybe I'll save that for the second whiskey. When I started, I had one really large competitor, and all the easy brands like Glenfiddich, Macallan, they all went to that one business. So I started playing with the other people that maybe weren't getting as much love, and I realized when doing so that the stuff they had was in a lot of cases more interesting.
Mhm.
And what's cool about all this is that, you know, 18, 17, 16 years on, a lot of these companies haven't forgotten that. And then opportunities arise from that. And like you said, but we'll save a bit of that for later. So I'm gonna fire up on the screen here our the whiskey you're trying. So it's 24 years old. This one, to be totally honest, we got an offer of casks. I didn't really notice it. And I think, again, going back to relationships, Sam Simmons at Boutique Whiskey, Adam Brands, the parent company, used to be the global brand ambassador for the Balvenie. I think he was like, I can't believe you didn't like at least want to try a sample of that mystery Speyside cask. He said the price on it's insane, and he was right. So we asked for a sample, and I was kind of lukewarm on it. I love the boutique whiskeys. I love their branding. I love their marketing. I think there's a link to it here. You can kind of get a sense of what they're all about. Their labels are playful and fun and wacky. They tell stories, but not everybody's into them. Not everybody wants the 500 ml bottles. There's a lot of people out there that want whiskey that just looks like what they're familiar with. And so some of these have been a hard sell, but I was like, sure, send us the sample. So we tried the sample, and it's just gorgeous. If you've still got that whiskey in front of you, it is so soft, so fruity, floral, elegant. It's natural cask strength, but it's really, I think it's rather low. Whereas not noticing it. Oh, 47.8. It is 24 years of age, and it's got a little bit of a funk to it. Like it's got a nice, a lot of the whiskeys that we as a store have a bit of a preference towards in recent years have been these lighter, spirit driven, not cask heavy whiskeys. And we love long-term fat maturation in a tired old cask. And this is
Mhm.
4 years in a refill ex bourbon barrel.
Yeah, it really lets the spirit sing, and this is definitely, although I don't like to sort of stereotype based on region, because that's getting harder and harder to do within Scotland, but this is sort of like your prototypical light Speyside in style, but thanks to the refill cask, you still get a lot of distillate influence at 24 years of age in a really cool manner. A little bit of dunnage working in there too with that funkiness, but still those big apple notes and pears for me. Just a really cool dram.
Yeah, and it's fresh. The malt is still there. I mean, a lot of single malts
Mhm.
at 24 years of age, it's hard to pull those malt tones out of them because the oak is just run roughshod over it, especially if it was a first fill or a fresh cask. And this is kind of naked. This is a naked Glenlivet that's been given time in the cask. And you've got one of Canada's best distillers out there who's on the call tonight and knows a lot about this too. Like there's a lot of cool things that happen when you leave the spirit in the wood. And it's not just about pulling character from it, but it's about the interaction, and it's about what the cask allows the spirit to do in the environment that it's in. And um, could we say this is somewhat typical of Glenlivet? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, Glenlivet to me is a whiskey that uh, you tend to see heavily doctored and chill filtered with caramel coloring in it. So what is Glenlivet? I don't know, but it's a lovely, as Evan said, stereotypically Speyside whiskey, unpeated, a bit floral, very fruity. A note on the label, this is part of what they call their cinema series. It's important to know the brand ambassador for Boutique's name is Dave Worthington, great guy. And this label is a riff on 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I guess Hal is peering out from inside the still, and he says, "I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid you can't name this." And that's a reference to the fact that this whiskey they were able to bottle it, they were able to buy it, but they can't name what it is. But there's some pretty deep, pretty big clues in there, Evan. I think, doesn't he say something about, we know you're going to Glenlivet?
Yeah, they mentioned we know you're going to Glenlivet, and it's tied for being the largest single malt distillery by volume, production wise, which means it can be only one of two things.
Glenfiddich or Glenlivet. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it was Glenfiddich, it would be a blended malt and you couldn't call it Glenfiddich.
Yep.
So that's how we all know
Exactly.
it's
Yeah. So we should mention too, as we're going through here, we do have you guys muted, unfortunately, just because it tends to be a little bit crazy with background noise and stuff if we don't. But feel free, if you've got some tasting notes or some questions or comments, toss them in the chat. We are watching that as we go through. Steve Lee, I was thinking as I was tasting this, my guess is this is kind of in your wheelhouse. It reminds me of years ago when you and I were talking about how you kind of saw Douglas Distillery's distillate and what you were looking for in a way.
Yeah, no, it's certainly reflective. Like I pick up those kind of, you're saying pear and apple, and I pick up some tropical fruits in there, and it's very reflective, like even a bit of honeydew melon in there, which is reflective of our base spirit as well. So when I tasted this, I was like, this has a good potential to see where Douglas whiskey would be with longer term aging. This is very reflective of what we do here as well.
You'd probably need a slightly cooler shaded
warehouse, a lot cooler.
Maybe with some humidity. And some
if you buried this in a root cellar or something like that, a cask, that you might get this.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, Steve Lee, you are in the interior of BC. I'm pretty sure there's someone who you can pay to dig a hole for cash. Or risk. So yeah, but things like that, they can just happen. No one will notice. It's just
not that we've done it, and I don't want people digging around the property, but we may already have an experience.
I'm joking, of course.
We have no barrels buried in our backyard.
Don't go digging for treasure around the distillery. So, but anyway, yeah, no, nice starter dram, really easy drinking. I will say, if you get a chance, I do encourage people to try the boutique bottlings. By and large, I've been extremely impressed with them. I've yet to have one that I didn't think was a great whiskey. I think the challenge they have is a lot of people just can't wrap their head around 500 ml bottles. And I think it's because they don't know how to, maybe in their head, they can't do the math to try to figure out. And so we joke about this, but we've never done it. Maybe we need to tell people what the price per 700 ml is as a comparative.
That's right.
But
yeah, we just multiply everything by like what 130% or something like that. Essentially,
there's a formula you could use for sure. But their whiskeys are undoctored. They never add coloring. If they finish something, they're pretty open about it. And they bottle things either at cask strength or at a strength they think is the best drinking strength for the whiskey. And they like to have fun, which is something that I think we also feel a good synergy with. And I think the same could be said about your operation, Steve Lee. I mean, a lot of your whiskeys have kind of cheeky, playful names to them, inside jokes and stories. So
certainly true. Yeah.
Well, it's boring to just make, granddad's whiskey effectively. So too short. Have some fun while you're doing it.
That's a pretty good segue into the next one too there, Andrew.
It is a pretty good segue. So yeah, the next whiskey that we're on to is a whiskey that's got an image of me on the label. It's from a company called Decadent Drinks under a label called Whiskey Sponge. And Whiskey Sponge has got an interesting story behind it. The guy who founded it, Angus McRailed, it didn't start out as a bottler. It actually started out as a blog where he would pillory and satirize the Scotch whiskey industry. And there's some incredible stuff on there. Like if you ever got time to kill, because some of the things he wrote are pages long and ludicrous. Just go check out whiskeysponge.com. He's not really doing it anymore. He's too busy. He's got Decadent Drinks, but then he's also got a distillery called Pyth that he's building, along with a guy named Johnny McMillan, who is with Barry Brothers and Rudd and an investor. But he's he's also well known because he's the guest reviewer on Whiskey Fun. So if you see our site, we never quote the man who we call the man in the Panama hat, also known as He Who Shall Not Be Named. If you don't know who we're talking about, he wrote a book called The Bible, and he's a piece of human garbage, if we're being totally honest. He's a misogynist, not a nice guy, does not deserve your money or respect. But we will often reference Serge Valentin from Whiskey Fun and Angus McRailed, who's on there as well. And so Angus got some notoriety from that too, but he started doing independent bottlings a bit as a lark, and it kind of grew into a business. And the opportunity came up for us to bottle a cask of Craigellachie, and so we did. And this is that Craigellachie cask. It's a 2003 cask. Go ahead and nose and taste it. We don't want you to wait too long. There's a bit of a story behind this and an explanation, and I got to open a different document to help explain that. Actually, Evan, you'd be impressed. I created a PowerPoint presentation for my tasting in Fort McMurray Friday night, and
Wow.
like, are you going to prepare a presentation? And I was like, I don't think I've done that since before COVID. So I did, and yeah, I might as well show it here because I think it'll help explain some of this stuff a little better. I think that's the button I choose. All right, just give me a moment here. All right, pause it there. Go back to Zoom. Come on, back to Zoom. I'm going to share my screen. So this is Angus McRailed. This is one of the things he put out last year. I don't know if you saw Bowmore. They released something called the Ark. It was a 52-year-old whiskey, and his blog referred to it as an exciting new sex toy. It is a pretty ridiculous creation. But that's not the one I wanted to show you. Oh, we're going the wrong way. We're going this way. So this is Craigellachie Distillery. I have been there and I have photos of it, but I don't know what I did with them. The important thing to know about Craigellachie Distillery, though, and this is really the key, and it explains the label, are these things down in the bottom right-hand corner here. They're called worm tubs. This is the old school, the traditional way of condensing spirit. The modern one that the vast majority of distilleries use is called a shell and tube condenser. They're more efficient. They have more copper contact. So they're preferred by most distilleries. But there's a number of distilleries, including Mortlach, Dailuaine, Talisker, and a few others that still use these because they create a heavier, sometimes meatier, even more like sulfury spirit. And the reason the industry likes these is that they'll add character for blends. Most distilleries even today are predominantly producing for blends. We'll see if that's still the case 20 years from now. When I started, 95% of the single malts being produced were going into blends. I think it's now closer to 80%. The single malt market has really grown and the blends market has started to shrink, but it's still the driver of most of the industry. And so whiskeys like Mortlach, like Craigellachie, fill a role creating these big, robust single malts that add weight and body and certain flavor profiles to the spirit. So also incidentally, this is kind of, if we were to drive out to you, many of you have probably driven past Craigellachie on the Trans-Canada Highway. Canadians call it Craigellachie because you don't speak Scots, but that's obviously where the last spike was driven in the railroad. But this is the slide I was looking for, which is kind of a zoom in on the label. The original idea for this was that we wanted to have the entire KWM whiskey team, of whom I think there was 6, lounging in a worm tub as if it was a hot tub. I don't recommend that you do this. It's probably a way to get badly burned. But Angus didn't want to pay for 6 faces. He said he could pay for 2. And fair enough, the artist, charges per face. So rather than offend any of the team by leaving them out, we decided to incorporate Walter, the store dog. And that's him there on the label. So we're basically having a hot tub in the worm tub at Craigellachie. And now, one other thing that's relevant to this, it's 20 years old, 53.4%. It's a refill cask. I should have thought of this before the whiskey came in, and I didn't. But I've been on the hunt for bottlings to celebrate my 20th anniversary in the whiskey industry. And we just realized days before this landed that it was from 2003, the year I started, and it was 20 years old. Retroactively classified it as a 20th anniversary whiskey. As one can do, I suppose. It's my bottling. But what I really love about this, again, like the Glenlivet, it's quite naked. The major difference here, though, is it's got a real cheesy funk to it on the nose. One of the other things Craigellachie has is a relatively long fermentation. Most distilleries don't. They use distiller's yeast, and they want a really rapid fermentation that maximizes the amount of alcohol they get in as short a time as possible, because that's how you can jam the most spirit through the distillery. But Craigellachie's got a little bit different profile. And like the Glenlivet, this one is really starting to go tropical. Evan?
Yeah, it does have a little bit of cheesiness to me as well, and it kind of combines with this interesting creaminess. Like, it reminds me of Liberté lemon yogurt, where you get like that sort of lemon citric, slight lemon curd note, but you get the creaminess from the yogurt as well. Great tropical notes underneath that. It's just a hint of spice, but more smooth than anything else. A little bit of alcohol heat, but it's not within realm of taking anything over, that's for sure. Another just like great sort of refill cask style whiskey.
Yeah. It's juicy. It's again, there's still a maltiness there, nice toasted oak. The palate it's sweet and fruity. And Evan, I think you nailed it with the lemon note, but for me, it's more like lemon meringue or like a lemon, like a lemon tart, something like that. We have that like thick layer of like lemon custard on top of it. Yeah, it's a pretty whiskey, and it's fun. It's fun to be able to put something kind of cheeky on the label. And I didn't show it, but like there's detail in there. I made sure that they made one of Walter's eyes blue because he has a blue eye and a brown eye. And they also captured his character. Like, he's sort of looking warily and untrustingly at the sponge figure, which is also appropriate because he will randomly bark at people for reasons that are known only to himself.
Well, and if Walter were to be a hat wearer, that is the hat he would wear.
You would, yeah. And it's kind of seems like it's like you'd have a good time, but you're also protecting yourself from the sun. It's what I'm reading into it. The last thing about this whiskey that's kind of fun is the back label. I won't read it all, but Angus, being rather verbose, he's got a great tasting note in here, referring to it as being lusciously waxy, which is something I didn't mention, but is definitely a prominent component there. But the way they described that they bottled it at natural cask strength without adding caramel coloring is as follows. We englassed it at natural cask strength without any faffing about, tomfoolery, jiggery pokery, or scandalous tinkering. And I mean, what's kind of just a cheeky, offhanded comment from him is kind of also what we love about some of the brands we work with. They aren't tinkering with the whiskey. They're not running it through chill filtration. They're not adding caramel coloring to it. And they're being honest and they're being transparent about it. And that's something that we both have a lot of respect for. Stevie, what are your thoughts on this guy?
It's good. I like the finish on this, just the kind of the oak spice that starts to come through, and almost like a bit of hazelnut in there. I get that fruit out of the gate, and then it just finishes really nice. So
the one element that's sort of not there in spades, although I think it does start to creep in a bit on the finish, is that slightly meaty, leathery character. And typically, for me, those leathery tones, they come from one of two places. The most common one, the most obvious one, is like sherry cask whiskeys often give you that sort of leathery tannin. This is not sherry cask, though. This is American oak ex-bourbon seasoned. But the other way you can get it, I think, is from having whiskey that's condensed or spirit that's condensed in a worm tub, because you're preserving some of those harder sort of edges from the bottom of your cut. Like, Stevie, because my understanding, like when I've tried a lot of spirit cuts, like when you get towards the end of your heart, that's when you start getting into sort of like fishy, oily, like often meaty tones, right?
Yeah, if you're doing your cuts really late. So we
Yeah.
do our cuts a little bit earlier, but yeah, you could certainly get it's not pleasant, really. But if you want that character in there, certainly a little bit of that's good. But I think it lends itself better to longer maturation.
For sure. Well, and I think, I mean, that's the other thing that I didn't say before, that is also what I love about these long-term maturations in tired old wood is time polishes and cures some of the flaws that are in the spirit if you leave it in the oak long enough. There's some things you can't get rid of, but some of those sharper, rougher, more volatile edges do over time dissipate. They burn off. And that's the thing that, like, I think the new distilleries in, say, Scotland versus, and probably true of yourself, versus the established industry have to think about, because a lot of them are not leaving their spirit for a minimum of 12 years before they bottle it. They're bottling it at a younger age, and so you can't have some of those rougher edges left behind.
Yeah, it's true.
Anyway, lovely little whiskey there. Hope you guys like it. I see Evan's putting the links into the chat. Rosalind, if you didn't get that, it's $245 for the Craigellachie. The one before it was $175, which would be about the equivalent of $220, I think, for a 700 mil, or maybe $225. I don't know, somewhere in that range. I think it's great. I think they're both great value compared to a lot of the stuff out there right now. The Glenlivet especially. Berry Brothers. I think we should go on to the Berry Brothers. Can we order from Kensington Wine Market for delivery to BC?
Can I jump in there on that?
Yeah.
So we've typically, and I'll let you answer as well. We have in the past, if one of the members is in Calgary, to pick up the whiskey and bring it back as part of the whiskey mule train. And I will be in Banff and Calgary in April. So if anybody sees anything here tonight that they really like, and they purchase it from Kensington Wine Market, I will bring that back in April with me as well.
Yeah. To add to that, Steve Lee, and to answer your question, Rob, we don't ship. We're not allowed to. I don't know if you're aware, but there's a bit of a brewing dispute between Alberta and BC over wine coming our way. And it has never been legal for us to send things that way. However, you as individuals can purchase things and leave them for collection by yourself or friends at a later date, and we're happy to hang on to them consolidated. And some people will find their own way to be united with their product. But yeah, we take a pretty hard line on this. We don't do it. I know there are other people who will, but I don't want to be one of the litigants to fight that fight. So so the short answer is yes, we do sell to people, but we don't ship. So
yeah, the upside for Kensington Wine Market on this is we don't ship directly to you. We do try and be as flexible as possible, and we will hold your bottles. And if you want to do individual purchases and just we toss them all in a box under your name until you're able to pick up, essentially, or somebody's able to pick up on your behalf.
We have a warehouse, so we've got room for things. And it's funny because we've got guys who buy, like, maybe they live in Toronto and they fly out once a year and they fly home with 12 bottles. And the best part about doing that is you're not breaking any laws when you do that. That's your own personal property and you're just going home with it. The gray area is the shipping. So we don't do that. And, it's fine. You can come see us. Come pay us a visit. We'll chat your ear off about stuff. Should we move on to the Glen Moray?
Yeah.
And I guess one other thing we add to that is we do offer whiskey clubs a discount. You just have to be in our system, which is easy to do. So that's something where I can even send a note to Steve Lee. And if I know a lot of you probably already are, and if you aren't and you'd like to be, we can get you set up. It's Barry's Glen Moray. So Berry Brothers and Rudd is a fascinating company. They started in, actually, I'll just grab the bottle here. I'm always uncertain. I think it was 1695.
I guess 98, but I could be wrong.
1698. You're right, it is 1698. I think I'm confused because that other family-owned business, Gordon
Mhm.
McPhail, is 1895. And I realize those aren't the same, but they're both nines and from a different century. Berry Brothers, the Rudd family, I believe, are the ones that still run it. I don't know if the Berries are still around. They started as coffee merchants to the Crown. Their original shop, you can see in London. It's at number 3 St. James Street. The floor is on a slant because at one point there was a fire and they overwatered the building, and so the floor is at like about a 15-degree angle. There's scars from a bomb from World War II that fell right in front of the shop that you can see in the facing of the building. And my most favorite curious little historical detail is that for the 5 short years that Texas was an independent country, they couldn't afford an embassy in London, so they rented an office from Berry Brothers and Rudd. So Berry Brothers and Rudd was the unofficial Texas embassy for 5 years before it became part of the United States. They created a blended whiskey you might have heard of called Cuddy Sark. They don't own it anymore, but they owned it for almost a century. And for 30 plus years, they were the exclusive marketers and retailers and bottlers of Glenrothes. They did not own the distillery, but they owned the right to bottle it. And Macallan's parent company, Edrington, still owned the distillery and the liquid, but Berry Brothers was the global bottler of Glenrothes, which is a very, very confusing business arrangement. Don't ask any questions. It just gets more confusing from there. They don't do that anymore, but what they have kept doing is independent bottlings. I've been fortunate to have a great relationship with this company now for 20 years. We get great casks from them, including, and I've got a bottle of it here. We just got in a 26-year-old Bowmore that they bottled for us. This is one of those ones though where if you have to ask how much it costs, it's probably not in your price range. Sadly, things like that have gotten a little stupid in recent years. But it's an incredible sherry butt matured Bowmore. I didn't think we would buy it, but then they sent us a sample and the liquid was really good, so we had to bottle it. But yeah, we get lots of cool things from them. And the other one Evan mentioned that's worth mentioning, and in retrospect, we probably should have put this into the lineup, is a distillery called Daft Mill. We're the only retailer in Canada that gets this. This is made by a very charming but slightly eccentric farmer from Fife in Scotland. He distills 6 months a year, roughly. Whenever he's not farming, he's making whiskey. He only produces enough to bottle about 20,000 bottles a year. The most bizarre thing about him, though, is that he started up in 2005 at the same time as Kilchoman, but he didn't release his first whiskey until 2017. I remember hearing about this guy. I had to beg to go see him, and this is about a decade ago. And it was the Berry Brothers guys who got me in to see him. And when the opportunity came in 2018 to start bringing berries into Canada, whether it was Francis or just the Berries guys, they're like, Andrew, you went to go see this guy 12 years ago and no one was even interested in it. So the whiskey's yours if you want. So that's how we have Berry Brothers exporting Daft Mill to us as an exclusive in Canada, which is kind of cool. So, but that's not what we're tasting. Evan, what do we got here? Glen Murray, 2000.
Yeah, so this is a 2007 Glen Murray. This is the second Glen Murray that we bottled. We had I think it was a 25-year-old Cadenhead that was bottled for our 25th anniversary, which was back in 2017.
About 2017. 92 is when we started.
Yeah. And Glen Murray, some of you might be Scotch Malt Whisky Society aficionados. And if you've been in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, which is a fantastic independent bottler, largest private whiskey club in the world, they bottled some tremendous Glen Murrays over the years. And something that I've noticed from them and from having Glenmoray from other independent bottlers, is Glenmoray tends to take to whatever cask you throw at it. I've had really good casks where they were almost virgin oak, almost bourbon-esque in style. I've had ex-Sauterne casks, Chenin Blanc casks, red wine casks, port casks, sherry casks, and it just does so well. The two that we bottled have been ex-bourbon though, and both of them have this sort of light, fantastic style to it that is just super enticing.
One of my jokes is I called Glenmoray the Chardonnay. Oh Jesus, I realized I was sharing I was cleaning up some emails. I used to call Glenmoray the Chardonnay of whiskeys, like, because it depended on what wood it was in. It could be almost anything. And, you know, people say they don't like Chardonnay, but do you not like oaked Chardonnay, or is it you don't like unoaked Chardonnay? Do you not like Chardonnay from certain parts of the world? Like, when you say you don't like Chardonnay, like, that doesn't say anything to me, because there's such a broad range of what Chardonnay is. And I think Glenmoray is the same. Like, Glenmoray can be almost anything. It's quite floral. I think that's what I love most about this one. It is just, it's so soft, so floral. It's very malty. I would guess this is probably a first fill ex-bourbon. I mean, it's not overly oaked, but it's quite creamy, quite toasty.
Yeah, Glenmoray for me, especially this and the Cadenhead we had, they have this nice grassiness and almost like it just reminds me of kind of like summer getting into August. Like it's like sunflowers and sunflower seeds and even a little bit dandelions in there, where it's just got this slight floral note just like wafting around in the background, along with the really good malt again, and some really nice fruit in there as well.
Yeah, the palate on this, and you know, the funny thing is, like, there's definitely some similarities, and I think you can kind of see what we're going for stylistically when we look for a lot of our casks. We want elegant, drinkable fruit bombs. Like, and I don't mean fruit bombs in the sense of like drowning in sherry fruit bombs. It's more like those subtle fruits, the citrus, orchard, tropical, and I think this delivers on this. Like, this Glenmoray is a dangerously drinkable whiskey. It's 145 for 2007 vintage, which is not bad. I mean, single casks from independent bottlers got kind of stupid in terms of pricing in recent years. I'm hoping we're going to see a bit of a pullback on that, because I think some companies have priced themselves out of the market with frankly very average whiskey a lot of the time. But yeah, I think this is a gorgeous whiskey. It came in with 3 other berries casks, and this is by far my favorite of the 4.
Well, you shouldn't say that, because we're trying another berries after this.
I know, but we're trying my second favorite from that parcel after this one, which ironically I don't have a bottle of at home with me. I thought I had them all, I don't. But
yeah, we have gotten quite a few berries casks over the last few years, including that parcel of 4. We still have an older single cask that is still around because it was a massive sherry butt that it was from, which is this Tobermory that is just, it's probably second, I think it is second fill sherry, but it's an insanely second fill sherried whiskey.
it's an absolute beast.
Yeah.
I mean, and not a beast in the sense of that it's undrinkable, but it is so big. It's, what is it, 64.8% alcohol.
Yep.
Which they must have filled that at a way higher proof, like high 60s. This is the guy there. And when you nose it, it almost smells like you're going into Lecheg, but you just can't find it. And it's because it's kind of that big and frankly almost obnoxious, but it's not.
Well, and it's obnoxious but clean at the same time. Like, it doesn't go into the tire fire funk that I love Lecheg for, but not everybody does.
Well, it doesn't fight you on the way down either, which is definitely a plus. That's another thing that we generally don't want, is we want whiskeys that people can drink neat or with water. I would never tell you whether you should or should not add water to your whiskey. But we generally try to bottle casks that don't need it, or that we feel don't need it. If something's hot and you've not even like added water to it right off the bat, that for us is often just, it's going to be tough. People aren't going to drink it. It's not going to be fun. It's going to fight them. So we want something that's balanced and, drinkable. I mean, that Glenlivet we started with is frankly crushable. Like,
Yep.
you could do a serious amount of damage to one of those bottles in a night just because it is so soft and so approachable.
What do you think on this one, Steve Lee?
This is my favorite so far. I love the
cool.
creaminess of it. I have to dig a little bit, but I like the kind of marshmallow, that chalky kind of sweetness that comes through in there, both on the nose and on the palate. But yeah, this is delicious.
Yeah, it's a lovely cask. I think probably the major difference, other than age, like it's 5 and 9 years younger than the last two whiskeys, is this is just fresher wood. So you're getting that lusher, sweeter profile to it. And yeah, this is a lovely whiskey. This is the kind of whiskey I could sit on a patio in the summer and just sip, which is not something I do a ton of in the summer when it gets hot, but like this is something that I could probably sit and have a sip of. Cool. Glentauchers, I think, is what we're on to next, which is from our friends at Gordon MacPhail. Let me pull that one up for you. So Gordon MacPhail is another company that we're very fortunate to have an incredible relationship with. And it started early in my career with Michael Urquhart, who is the third generation of his family to run Gordon MacPhail. It's a family-owned business from Elgin. And the cool thing about a company like Gordon MacPhail, much like Berry Brothers, is people might come and go, but the company has a way of preserving relationships that transcends employees or, family members running it. And in the case of Gordon MacPhail, when Michael retired and his nephew Richard took over the Canadian market, he made sure to let Richard know who their partners were that they've been working with for a long time and who to always, look after, and this reciprocality of it. And for me as a small business owner, and I mean, I know sometimes people have this outsized view of what Kensington Wine Market is based on maybe our social media or what have you. Like, we are a single shop. We're not huge. My pockets aren't all that deep. And we rely on the goodwill of, our customers, but also our suppliers for helping us be what we are. And Gordon MacPhail has consistently done that. We've had some incredible casks from them in the last few years, from both Gordon MacPhail, but also Ben Romick, their distillery. And the cool thing about those brands, and I'm saying this not because of the relationship I have with them, but they are the gold standard of the entire Scotch whiskey industry. Every distillery will tell you when you sit down in one of their master classes, or if you visit the distillery, that they've got the best oak policy. They don't. One company has the best oak policy, and it's Gordon MacPhail and Ben Romick. And there are others that get really close. Certainly, companies like Glenfarclas, some of the other independent distilleries get really close. They've got good oak policy, but Gordon MacPhail is almost untouchable on this. And we've been able to bottle some really incredible casks. This Glentauchers is one of 2 Glentauchers that we've bottled in roughly a year. The second one's coming. It's an older cask from 2000 that's heavily sherried, but this one is ex-bourbon, and it's a young, kind of toasty, nutty Glenfarclas. And the price point on this, especially for Gordon MacPhail and the quality of their spirit, I think is great. So this is it here. Evan, what do you got on the nose with this?
Well, before we get into that, Lynn is asking, explain oak policy to us newbies.
Sure. So basically, oak policy is the wood that you're maturing your spirit in. the easiest way to explain this without spending 20 minutes, which is what probably the topic would deserve to give you everything that I think you need to know, is to talk about sherry casks and what sherry casks are. Most of what the industry, the Scotch whiskey industry, uses today are called sherry seasoned casks. And those casks might be seasoned with sherry for as little as 3 months. If you're lucky, it might be 6 to 9. And then those casks go to Scotland and they're filled with whiskey that will someday be bottled as sherry cask single malt Scotch whiskey. That is not sherry that will ever be drank as sherry. That sherry will be then put into another cask to season that. And the cycle will repeat until that sherry is not useful anymore. And then they'll either distill it into brandy or into ethanol, or they'll do other crazy stuff with it because it's still got some value, but no one will ever drink it. Most of the industry now relies on these sherry seasoned casks because the supply of sherry maturation casks just can't meet the demand. In fact, it probably can't meet like 5.5% of the demand for global sherry casks. But not everybody treats this process the same way. Gordon MacPhail specifies not just a longer sherry seasoning. Their casks are seasoned for, I think it's between 3 years and 6 months, which is far more than anybody else. But not only that, they actually specify a thicker stave. Their casks have thicker oak, and they do this for a couple of reasons. One, this is the type of wood, the thickness of the wood that the industry used to rely on for shipping sherry from Spain to Scotland. It makes sense that if you're going to ship the liquid in a cask, if it's got thicker oak, it's going to be stronger, it's going to be less likely to break and more likely to survive. So they're trying to replicate the style of wood that was being used 100 years ago, 70 years ago, that isn't anymore. The other part of it is that the thicker the staves, the harder it is for air to get in and out of that cask. So maturation takes place more slowly. And that's what they're looking for. They're not looking to rush things. They're looking to put things in wood for a long time and have them mature. So a 15-year-old sherry cask from Gordon MacPhail, even though it's first fill, sometimes doesn't, even though it has maybe the color, doesn't often have as much of the tannins and isn't as heavy as some of other distilleries' first fill sherry because it's not the same. The cask has been treated completely differently. And when I say that they have the best policy, the sherry cask whiskeys they're releasing right now are as good or better than anybody else's. And it's because of the way they treat this. They don't rush things. They don't cut corners. Everything about this company is about doing things right. And it's hard to do that, especially if you're a big liquor company like Diageo, and some years are leaner than others, and you got to pay your investors. You got to pay your shareholders. Gordon MacPhail doesn't operate that way. They don't think that way. They think about their approach is literally what we do today is for the next generation and the generation that follows that. It's not for us. So they're custodians of their business, and it's hard to emphasize this enough. This is a company that doesn't cut corners, and you can't say that about every other company in the industry. So
yeah, just to tag on to that too, on a side note on this, when we're trying the berries possibly, but also the Gordon and MacPhail one we're trying now, there's a very different thing that's happening with this whiskey and how it came to us. So with the Glentauchers that we're trying now, this would have been something that Gordon MacPhail likely filled or got a tanker load of and filled into their own casks. And that was the only cask it saw. Whereas with the first two we tried from Batuki Whiskey Company and Whiskey Sponge, and this is not denigrating them at all as independent bottlers, but they're 20-year-old and 24-year-old whiskeys from companies that are not that old. They purchased those from brokers somewhere along the way, or got them in trade from somebody, and what they're doing is sort of selecting something, and it's almost like a needle in a haystack. There's its own art form is selecting a cask that's mature and ready to go, and bottling it and it being good. But what G&M is doing is kind of going at it from a very, very early stage and controlling the whole maturation cycle. The only thing they didn't do is actually distill the whiskey. Yeah.
just to help Evan's, because Evan, that's such a good point. Like I would say their approach is that they don't trust the distilleries to put the spirit into good enough wood. So they would either bring their own casks to the distillery, or as Evan said, they would buy, an IPC or a tanker of spirit and put it into their own casks themselves, because that's how meticulous they are about this. And just to drive this home, like, this isn't new. They were bottling single malts in the 20s, 30s, 40s, long before distilleries were doing this. Like Glenfiddich, Glenlivet didn't start bottling single malts. Macallan the same until the 1960s. Gordon MacPhail was doing this for decades before they were. Everyone else was doing blends. And I don't know if you saw, like 2 years ago, Gordon MacPhail released the oldest whiskey in the world. It was an 80-year-old from Glenlivet. 6 months later, Macallan bottled an 81-year-old Macallan. Where do you think they got that 81-year-old Macallan from? Wasn't Macallan.
Wasn't their own barrels.
Macallan didn't have the foresight to hang on to a cask for 8 decades. They bought it back from a family-owned business that thinks long-term. And for those reasons and many more, like, as someone who's been, I like to joke, drinking professionally for 20 years, Gordon MacPhail is the gold standard. There's a lot of people that get really close to as good as they are, but they are the gold standard. It's not Macallan, it's not Glenfiddich, it's not Glenlivet, it's Gordon MacPhail.
Yep.
And their distillery, Ben Romick, is incredible too. Back to this Glentauchers, because we do have to talk about this.
Yeah.
This is a 16-year-old, 58.8%. It's a refill ex-bourbon barrel, but it's a fairly active refill ex-bourbon barrel. Still sort of soft and fruity. I know, Steve Lee, you were talking about honeydew on an earlier whiskey. For me, I got cantaloupe on this one more than honeydew, but it's toasty. This to me is almost like, if I had guessed, I would have guessed this was first fill ex-bourbon, because I find those toasty notes, those oaky tones coming out of it are quite prominent, but it's not. It's a refill cask.
Yeah, this is the other cool thing about independent ballers, is a lot of you would be aware too, is we do get to see things like Glentauchers, which don't get a lot of official single malt bottlings. Most of what Glentauchers produces goes right into Ballantine's. It's one of the key components for Ballantine's whiskey on the single malt side of things. But it makes this great sort of lush, fruity whiskey style. And it just shows in spades here for me.
Well, and Glentauchers Distillery is a fascinating distillery, because I think it was sort of, I don't want to say neglected, but it was definitely forgotten. And it's not important, because unlike Glenlivet or Aberlour or Scapa, Pernod Ricard is not trying to promote it as a single malt. Like, it's still just a distillery to produce whiskey for blends.
Yeah. It's a workhorse.
Yeah, one of the cool things about that, though, is that a lot of it gets filled into just standard refill ex-bourbon casks. And as much as I spent like a few minutes going off on a rant about how good Gordon MacPhail's sherry is, like, my favorite oak is actually refill ex-bourbon. I love refill ex-bourbon barrels and hogsheads for long-term maturation, because you get whiskeys like the first three we tried that are really spirit driven. And they're kind of naked. I love that style, but a lot of the Glentauchers that we see is like that, because they weren't intending to bottle it as a single malt. They never thought anyone would be interested in it when they made it as anything other than a component for a blend. But you go through enough casks of Glentauchers, you're going to find a lot of diamonds in the rough that make for great single malts. And we've been fortunate to see a lot of those. Steve Lee, do you have any thoughts on the Glentauchers?
Yeah, it's I love the floral notes. I smell, and I don't know what brand of Kool-Aid I smell, but it smells like Kool-Aid to me. So when I
now you're talking my
nose,
language.
I was getting that fruity note, and I was like, what Kool-Aid is this? So I've been nosing and trying to dig and find exactly what flavor of Kool-Aid. Now, for the record, I don't drink Kool-Aid anymore, so that's probably why I'm struggling to find which brand of Kool-Aid it is. But yeah, I love that fruit note.
Steve Lee, I too have not had Kool-Aid in probably multiple decades, so I can't comment on it. But yeah, I know what you mean, almost like that powdered synthetic, like an almost like an artificial fruit flavor.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Evan has some young children's, and I'm sure he experiences powdered drinks. Everyone,
Yeah, you would think so, but I mean, there's some garbage that we won't even feed them. Like, well, pop is fine, but Kool-Aid, that's just a line too far, I guess. But if I'm trying to remember my Kool-Aid flavors, this is kind of like grape meets blueberry for me right now.
I don't think I ever had anything other than grape or whatever the orange one was. So anyway, there's orange drink from McDonald's, but I don't know that.
Yep.
If I'm referencing orange drink in a tasting note, it's probably not a positive. So
yeah, you could say Tang just to like take it up a notch.
but isn't Tang's a little different. Like I know Tang.
Yeah.
Back in my late teens and early 20s, like if I was going into the woods for several days, we'd often take Tang with us. To liven up whatever water we were swilling. But anyway, I digress. Evan, you're gonna have to lead us alone on the next one because as I mentioned, I forgot to bring a bottle of home. So we've got the Dailuaine, which incidentally is another distillery that creates a slightly meaty, sulfury style with, and I don't know if it has worm tubs, but I do know that they try to have that style or profile come through in the spirit. So, do you want to? Well, I'll say a few things about it. And then you lead the tasting on it. But this is a young cask. It's only a 12-year-old. This is the interesting one. And I said we would never do this, but we still had the sample come through, and then I had to eat my words. This is from an ex-Vinsanto cask, which is not something we've ever done before. Vinsanto, for those who don't know, is a sweet wine from Italy. Literally, I think it's wine of the saints, or saints wine. And yeah, I was like, this. I actually think we just asked for the sample because I wanted to see how bad it was going to be. And then I was like, oh, it's actually pretty good. I guess we should probably bottle it. So
yeah,
that's how that came about.
Yeah, so Dailuaine is another interesting distillery, as Andrew said. Glentauchers, which we tried before, it's owned by one of the largest whiskey companies in the world, which is Chivas Brothers, which is owned by a French company named Pernod Ricard. They also own a big distillery in Windsor here in Canada. But Dailuaine Distillery is owned by the largest spirits company in the world, which is Diageo, which owns a relatively large distillery in Manitoba, in Gimli. But Dailuaine is one of those unsung heroes or unsung single malts in their plethora of single malt distilleries in Scotland. They focus on their classic malt range when it comes to single malts, which is about 8 different distilleries, but about 30 others just don't really get the light shone on them in the same way, because again, they're used a lot of the time for Johnny Walker or J&B Rare. Dailuaine is one of the, I've started referring to it as the other waxy distillery. If people like those wax-driven notes, they probably know Clynelish, which is also owned by Diageo. Dailuaine makes a slightly waxy profile as well, and that waxiness comes off here in a really nice manner for me. The Vinsanto cask makes it a little bit more sort of bakery-esque in style, going into some Danish notes and a little bit more of a dessert-like note on there as well. But it's a gorgeous whiskey and just a little bit more richness and sweetness thanks to the Dailuaine distillate style and that Vinsanto cask coming into play.
Yeah. Steve Lee, Evan's going to need your backup on this one because I don't have the liquid in front of me to make up things that I'm tasting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm picking up the chocolate note that's in there as well.
Yeah.
So there's almost it's bitter, but there's an underlying sweetness that's in there. Like it's not quite coffee-ish, but yeah,
Maybe
it's chewy. It's really thick.
Yeah. Yeah, this is more like, for me, I get where you're going. I would like, I see the white fruit and the orchard fruit side of things, and it reminds me of like Like if you did a really rich chamomile tea and then just doused it in honey, it would get something like this. Some custard-like notes on there as well.
Mhm. I was just looking through my own notes on this. One of the things we play up a lot is, or we say a lot is, we're wine cask skeptics when it comes to whiskey.
Yeah.
And I think we are because a lot of independent bottlers or distilleries have maybe not been using them well for a lot of the last 10 years. And when it's good, it's kind of like, to us it's notable because most of what we see that's put into X wine casks is not great. And I think it's because they're wet filled. For me, the best way to approach them is definitely the STR, the shaved, toasted, and recharred element. But if you're not doing that, like hopefully at least you're making sure it's empty or rinsing it before you put the whiskey in, because we've had like so many just tannic, like
Offensive?
overly tannic, musty, like really unpleasantly musty whiskeys. And I'm convinced it's because a lot of these companies are either the casks are either spoiling before the distiller puts their spirit in, or they're not dumping the wine out before they put the spirit in. And either way, it just makes something that's really unpleasant to drink. Steve Lee, I saw you sort of nodding that maybe you have some insights into this, or maybe your own opinions on wine casks.
Yeah, I think it could just really overwhelm the spirit. So especially when they're fresh. So when we talk, like we just got some barrels from Mooncursor, and probably gonna butcher the name, a Carmenere wine.
That sounds
So
pretty good. Crystal's nodding. So
she's nodding, yeah. So I think so. We're really closely monitoring them because I worry that the wine can dominate the underlying whiskey tone, and we've learned that in the past as well. And we just did with Cal in town here. He just did a shave toast rechar on one of Mooncursor's barrels that we're going to be.
Ooh,
so
that's really exciting.
So yeah, so he did one barrel for us, and we're going to give it a try. But I do find that the wine barrels can really overwhelm the spirit if you don't watch them really closely. So when we talk to winemakers, if we're going to be getting like we have some port style wine barrels right now. Actually, Stuart Knott, who's on the tasting here, we just pulled the sample from the Craigellachie barrel from Burrowing Owl. And I just want to make sure that we're not overwhelming the underlying whiskey, which we sometimes get in some sherry barrels. It's almost like the sherry's too dominant. It overwhelms the balance of the whiskey. And that's only me personally. So.
Well, there's definitely people that like that style, but there's quite a few sherried whiskeys that I've had that get accolades and everybody loves them, but I find they're not even whiskey at the end of the day.
Just tastes like sherry, but at like
cask strength sherry. Yeah,
55%.
Yeah.
No, there was a period in my career where I was like big on sherry, but it was kind of different at that time. Like sherry casks, the 20 and 30 something sherried whiskeys we were seeing a decade ago are not what we're seeing today. And I think that's a big part of it. And it's a change. So it's not to say that like a wine seasoned cask can't make for a good whiskey cask. It's a combination of how you use that cask, and then, as you said, Steve Lee, making sure it's balanced and that maybe it's not overdoing it. Like the oak's got a lot of life to give, but what you don't want is to tarnish or ruin the spirit by maybe picking up things that you didn't want to get from that cask at the same time. So
yeah, this is a little bit tongue in cheek, but probably the best thing you can do is just, if you want a safe bet, is just dump a bunch of Glenmorangie in there, and then it'll probably end up all right.
I mean, it is a fair point. No single malt in the world takes to too much wine influence as well as Glenmorangie does, and I don't know why. But anyway, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? I think we should move on to some sherry. since we just talked about sherry casks. So the next whiskey that we have is from a distillery called Arran. From what I understand, you guys do not get a great selection of Arran in BC, and I believe it has to do with the importer there. I won't say anything about them. We've got a great importer in Alberta for this brand. They are not the same company, and it really is a shame because Arran for us, and it's gotten harder in recent years, but Arran for the longest time was our go-to whiskey. Like, do you like, bourbon cask Glenlivet or Glenfiddich? Hey, you should try the Arran 10. Do you like big sherried Macallan but don't want to spend a stupid amount of money? You should try the Arran 18. Like it became for us this like underappreciated, amazing value whiskey. And we've bottled more casks of Arran than any other distillery. This particular one is our 13th store Arran pick. Most of the picks we did were between 17 and 22 years of age. Back at a time when like no one else would let us bottle 18, 19, 20, 22-year-old whiskeys. But this is going the opposite direction. It's a 9-year-old. And there's also something else that's unique about this. Most of the sherry casks Arran's filled, and the distillery's been around since 1995. It was the first of the new distilleries. Of course, you had Kilchoman and Daftmill following about a decade later, and then almost 40 other distilleries since that. It's now getting very close to 30 years. Like it's only, I think it's 27 or 28 years old this year. They predominantly fill sherry hogsheads, which we've really loved. This is the first time we've ever bottled a sherry butt of Arran. And it is a rich, nutty, chocolatey profile. I'll give you some quick stats here. 58.2%, 9 years of age. This is sort of a good comment. Like when we're looking for single casks, we want things that we feel are good value. And basically you have price, you have age, and you have the liquid. And when we look for things, it's like, where do all those three pieces fit together? And so we're not afraid of bottling young whiskeys if they're good. We're not afraid of having young whiskeys that are maybe expensive. We've done that a lot with Kilchoman. But with Arran, like consistently good value. I think this is $125 a bottle.
Yeah.
And it is. Evan, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, the like going back to what I said about sherry, sometimes becoming overcooked or overkill on some whiskeys. The great thing about this cask to me is that, and I tend to like Arran casks that are refill ex-bourbon or like a very, very refill sherry where the sherry doesn't come in as prominent in this as this one. But to me, this one still has the sort of typical orchard fruit notes and white fruit notes of Arran, and I still get a bit of that ginger note, which tends to be on Arran as well for me. Just a great marriage of spirit and sherry cask, and I think it probably had to be bottled at 9 years old to maintain that, but we got it at a good time, that's for sure.
Yeah, this is a whiskey that that's a good point, Evan. Like, I don't think this could have sat in cask for another 5 years. It would have just been like pop. But this has got a really nice balance to it. It's a cask that one of our other managers, Evan's one of the managers, but Sean, one of our other managers, were in Scotland. I guess it'll be 2 years ago this fall. And it's a cask that we selected while we were visiting the distillery. And it's a great whiskey. Arran's a small independent company. They've got a real interesting perspective on how to run their business. They don't push their prices up as much as a lot of other companies have done. And I think it's because they take a bit of a long-term view to their strategy. They know that markets will turn eventually, and you want the consumers to be, you want them to remember that you were offering them good value way back when. And I think Arran has always been that company. They've got a great second distillery now. We call them Arran, but they technically are sort of trying to refer to this whiskey now as Lochranza, which is the name of the town it's in, because Arran has a second distillery on the Isle of Arran now called Lag, and they're trying to promote them both as being Isle of Arran distillers, one of them being Lag, the other being Arran. But yeah, great whiskey. I think I might even have I've got a little map here, I think. Let's see if I can pull it up. Stevie, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I've always liked Arran as well, and and this is just me personally, but I've always found it takes water really well and just really enhances the flavor profile. Brings out an underlying sweetness in the whiskey. So
cool. I don't always find water works with sherry casks, but I've been proven wrong from time to time. But I think their spirit's great. I think they took the approach. I mean, and this was before Dr. Jim Swan came on the scene and became the distillery whisperer for all the new distilleries. Arran had sort of a similar approach. I've got the map here so you can see the island. They knew that they were going to have to start selling whiskey at a young age to keep the distillery running, like to keep the lights on, to keep filling casks. And so they made a more characterful, but very clean new make spirit right off the bat. But they did this while still having relatively long fermentations, creating something interesting, and then putting it in good wood. Their oak, I'm not going to say that they're as good as Gore MacPhail, but like they put them into bloody good casks. Like we've seen a ton of great bottlings from them, and the quality is excellent. But this is the island here. This is the reason why I wanted to bring this up, because you can see the Arran distilleries at the north of the island here, in Lochranza, which is a little sheltered bay, and then Lag is down on the southern end of the island. Lag is making a heavily peated whiskey, whereas the original Arran, the Lochranza distillery, makes an unpeated malt, but it's a beautiful, beautiful whiskey. The island's great too. Literally everything you can see in Scotland, except for a big city, you can see on Arran. They have mountains, they've got barley fields, golf courses, castles, stone circles, distilleries. I'm sure I'm missing things. They've got sheep, everything people go to see in Scotland, they've got on the Isle of Arran. They call it Scotland in miniature. And actually, one other random fact about it, the Highland-Lowland boundary fault, which is a geological feature that cuts across the middle of Scotland, just north of Glasgow and Edinburgh, cuts right through the middle of the island of Arran. So they even have there's a Highlands in, technically, Arran is a Highland malt and Lag is a Lowland malt. Because the Lag distillery is in although the SWA, I don't think followed that logic, but regardless.
No, they'd be a Highland Island based on that definition, I think.
SWA is, so anyway, any other thoughts on this one before we move on?
Yeah, just a great sherried whiskey, and if you go to Scotland, you should definitely visit the Isle of Arran. The ferry landing, I don't know if there is two. I've only been to the one on Arran itself, which was a fantastic story. But you act to Andrew's point, you actually essentially just go within about 2 kilometers of the Lochranza Castle, which is this old castle that sits right on the waterfront. And I don't know, might even be flooded half the time because of it. But it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous island.
Weird. Yeah, to Evan, I took Evan to Arran in 2019, and his flight was delayed because of weather, and we stopped at Glengoyne on the way there. And while we were at Glengoyne, we learned that they had canceled the main ferry sailing from Ardrossan to Braddock. So our only hope to get to Arran, and we were supposed to spend the night there and spend the next day at the distillery, our only hope was to drive 3 hours around the Kintyre Peninsula and catch the ferry from the north. And I scared the shit out of Evan driving through wet, soggy roads. I had a Mercedes sedan of some kind, standard. We fishtailed at least twice. And despite best efforts, we missed the ferry by 2 minutes. But as we're coming down the hill, this is a true story. I started flashing my high beams as we're coming down the hill, because it was it was so gray, and not because of the time of year. It was so gray from the clouds that it was like almost dark, like night out. I'm flashing my high beams. The ferry came back and got us. And when I told people the story about this, they're like, that never happens. Like, these are people that live on the island. They're like, I've never heard of anyone ever doing that before.
Mhm.
And I offered to buy the guys beers, and they're like, no, you're fine. It's
Yeah.
fine. But
Yeah, it's two Canadians have the one good Calmac ferry story out there apparently. But yeah, Andrews, I'm not, I tend to be a pretty laid back passenger. But I felt like I should have been like holding the map as a rally driver and telling him how hard the turn was going to be on this trip out there.
I've been to Scotland 20 times and have yet to get in an accident. So
Yeah.
knock on wood of some sort here. Anyway, Aaron's great. Kavalan. Yeah, Stevie, we let Stevie talk about that one. So we'll move on to the Kavalan. I do have a few more slides here because I created a presentation for my trip up north in Alberta. So I'm going to pull up Kavalan here. Here we go. Kavalan's been around for a surprisingly long time now. I think they started around 2008, 2007 or 8. They've been around for a while. We were lucky. We were we were the first retailer in Canada to get to sell Kavalan, thanks to our friend Thomas. I always wanted to do a cask of Kavalan, but the opportunity didn't come up. And it was always one of those things where people really liked it, but it wasn't always an easy sell. And I think a big part of that was people just couldn't wrap their head around the price, and they couldn't wrap their head around the age, because the whiskeys are young. This is a very tropical distillery. If anyone's been to Taiwan, it is hot. Like, imagine the hottest day in Oliver, and it's like that almost all year round in Taiwan, except for it's humid as well. It's a crazy place, but they love whiskey there. It's a huge market for whiskey. And I got one quick anecdote, but dive in, go ahead and nose and taste this while I'm rambling on here about Kavalan. I remember the first time I poured it in a tasting at the store. It was a blind tasting, and I think the tasting was like sherry bombs. So it was all big, heavily sherried whiskeys. I had 7 whiskeys. 6 of them were Scottish whiskeys, all sherry casks. The 7th one was Kavalan. It wasn't their sherry cask, but it was one called the Vinho, which, if you haven't tried, is their STR, their shaved, toasted, recharred wine cask whiskey. And it's important to note in this story that I had a table with 4 older British gentlemen at it. 3 of them were Scottish, 1 was English. Best I can tell, they weren't holding that against him. And 16 odd other people in the room. And at the end of the tasting, we asked everyone what their favorite whiskeys were. And 19 out of 20 people, including all of those 4 old British guys, said the Vinho was the Kavalan was their favorite whiskey. They didn't know what they were trying. It was a blind tasting. I didn't tell them the age of anything. I didn't tell them where they're from. We just tried the whiskeys and then had a vote. And when I revealed that the most popular whiskey was from Taiwan, these 4 British guys, they weren't shocked or surprised. They were angry. They were convinced that somehow I'd fooled them. This was probably 2011, somewhere in that range. But it was a great whiskey. And much like this opportunity came up for us to bottle a Kavalan. This is their Solist Oloroso sherry. Evan, you might have been right. I know before you were advocating that maybe we do this before the Arran, because the nose on this is so soft. The sherry in this, like this nice subtle chocolate, kind of like a maple syrup edge to it. And then you start getting into like the tropical fruits. It's so subtle and so gentle on the nose.
It's still big enough that it stands up to the Arran though, on the palate, in my opinion. Kavalan tends to have this really cool tropical sort of driven distillate. Passion fruit juice is something that comes out for me on this in spades. But this is again like the Arran, where like on the younger side, of course, for whiskey, but probably around average age for Kavalan. But this is a good combination of the spirit and the sherry cask kind of marrying together. without a whole lot of fighting. You get the niceness, the great sort of like dried fruit notes of the sherry, but you still get these great tropical notes underneath that as well for the Kavalan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in some ways they're almost out Macallan in terms of the style of their whiskeys these days. But yeah, it's so approachable, really easy drinking. We got a great price on this too. Like, this is less expensive than the regular Solist Oloroso sherry that's available in our market. It was a real thrill to get it. Kavalan, this is only a 6-year-old whiskey, but it's not really fair to look at it as a 6-year-old whiskey because this is a hot climate distillation, hot climate maturation. Their evaporation rate, I think, is somewhere north of 12% a year. And that's because they're, it's so hot there. And, the maturation happens more quickly. I mean, it's a bit of an oversimplification because I don't know that you always get the finesse and the subtlety. You can't speed that up as much, but you get an effective aging. Like, this is the oak content that a Scotch whiskey would take 18 to 20 years to get in under similar conditions. Would that one maybe have some other notes to it through a more subtle, longer maturation? Probably, but it's not really fair to look at this and say, oh, it's just 6 years old, because in Scotland you're going to lose less than a third of your barrel in 18 years. Whereas in Kavalan, you're going to lose a third of your cask in the first 5 to 6 years.
What do you think on this one, Steve Lee?
Yeah, I've always liked Kavalan. I've never liked their price. It always seems to be really heavy priced. And I mean, it's always been good. I mean, Thomas always shared fabulous whiskey. But I find with Kavalan too, it's like the fruit is a little bit more vibrant, if that makes any sense. And I don't know if that's due to the age, that younger age, but the whiskey is fantastic for the age. So I've always admired what they were doing with their whiskey in such a short period of time, and creating a fabulous product.
Well, they've created effectively a global brand. It's big in Asia now. And I mean, why shouldn't Asian people be excited and happy to drink something that's just as good as things being made in other places of the world that's being made locally? Like, it's big in China, it's big in Japan. There was a good question in there about the casks. Where does Kavalan get their sherry casks? They get them from the same place that the Scotch whiskey industry gets them from. Sherry casks come from Jerez predominantly in Spain. And there's a very competitive market for the best casks. I'm not going to go out and tell you that Kavalan's sherry casks are as good as Gordon MacPhail's, but I would wager that they're on the high end in terms of quality. This is a very wealthy company. It's owned by a billionaire. They're not going to cut corners on things like that, and their quality is consistently very high. I agree with Steve Lee, like, the price is something that's always a little difficult, but like, it's hard to compare apples to oranges with Kavalan to standard, say, Scotch whiskeys, because they operate under different conditions. And then the other issue is shipping. Like, other than electronics, which probably go through the States first, there's not a lot that gets shipped from Taiwan to Canada. So it's difficult. I think these things all have to come on airplanes. Like, there's no quick sea voyages. Like, there's not container ships coming from Taiwan to Canada on the regular, unfortunately.
Well, also on the money perspective, and this could be wrong, but I remember reading years ago that when King Car Distillery was built, which is what Kavalan is under, essentially, or that's Kavalan Distillery as well. They essentially tried to model it after Macallan. I don't know if that's full on the stills, but the business model was definitely a part of it, where you take a look at the standard packaging for Kavalan. And it's the box that it's in now is actually less ostentatious than the older, like, leather tubes used to be. But they have definitely gone out of their way to create a luxury product and not just another whiskey.
Yeah. I mean, and probably wisely. I mean, you think about how crowded and saturated markets can get. I mean, uh, in Alberta, and I know BC's got a ton too. There's something like 40 or 50 distilleries in Alberta that are making like what will eventually be called whiskey. Like that's crazy. Think about that. Like there's only almost five, I think there's about 5 million people in Alberta, and there's 40 local companies doing that. We've already seen this happen on the beer side of things where things come hyper local. Like Calgary's got 50 craft breweries, so we don't get as much craft beer from BC or California anymore because we don't need it. There's people making incredible beers right where we live. So it's going to be interesting to see how that happens. And I think, if you're a company like Kavalan, you're not thinking about just the local market, you're thinking global. And I think that's, that's the strategy that they're gonna take. You can be small and local, or you can be big and international, but you can't really be anything in the middle because there's just too many people out there competing for the same business.
Most of you probably have tried some Kavalan in some shape or form. It has been in the market for a little bit here now, which is great. If you haven't had it before, the Solist series is what they're known for, which are single casks at cask strength, and every single bottling in the Solist series is a single cask at cask strength. They kind of made a mark with the Solist sherry, or the Oloroso sherry, which we're trying, and the Solist Vino, which is an STR or shaved toasted recharred wine cask, which we talked about earlier. If you want to try, in my opinion, if you want to try Naked Kavalan, their Solist ex bourbon tends to be fantastic, really tropical, and ex bourbon seems to let the spirit sing even more than this, in my opinion. Years ago, and I don't know if they are still doing it, but they used to do a Solist peaty, it was called, which was Solist and ex peated Scotch casks. That was utterly fantastic. It was just like ethereal peat, a little bit of dusty mushroom notes, and the tropical notes that came along with it, where the peat just didn't take it over, and it was just gorgeous whiskey.
Yeah, it was. Those peaty casks were the best.
Yeah.
Like they do make a peated single malt now, but
Yeah.
the peaty casks were great. Rob, I love your comment. 9 days to Prince Rupert, 15 to Vancouver. I know people in Calgary that have made a fortune because they realize that they can bypass the Port of Vancouver and all the strikes they're doing by setting up distribution hubs in Calgary to receive stuff from Prince Rupert by rail, and it's still faster getting it through Vancouver. So I like that. That's funny. Amrut, should we go to?
Yeah.
So, I've got a couple of funny slides. Well, one funny slide from my presentation that I did up in Fort Mac that works for this tasting too. I just got to find it because we've been huge fans of Amrut for a long time. Amrut's not a new distillery. It actually dates from the 1950s. And it might surprise a lot of you. I'm sure most of you have probably tried Amrut by this point in time, at least once. But Amrut has been on the single malt scene in North America now since the mid 2000s. Like it's been around for a long time. But they've been making whiskey since the 50s. India is the single largest producer of whiskey in the world, with a big asterisk beside it, and the world's largest consumer. Most of what they make domestically in India is actually made from molasses, so it doesn't legally qualify as whiskey in North America, although it still gets let in because Canada Border and Customs, I guess, is not that diligent. But Amrut is a proper single malt made with quality. The guy who makes it now, the master distiller, there's the still room there, beautiful little still room, is this guy here in the middle, Ashok. So there's Sean, one of my other managers, Evan's colleague, and I. Sean and I, we ran into him at, I think it was at Gatwick Airport. And then the next day he was literally at our shop. I think Sean had the day off that day. Ashok's just an incredible guy. he's one of those people that values relationships and time. And he basically picked this cask and said, that one's going to Kensington. He brought 6 samples. Some of them were offered to a few of our competitors around town, not before we got a chance to try them all and decide which one we wanted. And when I looked at these, I was like, oh, there's no way I'm going to bottle a port cask. By and large, I'm not a fan of port casks. I don't think they're great. They're really, really hit or miss for me. But Ashok was adamant, like, the port cask, this is one of the best whiskeys I've got. You really got to look at this. You really should think about buying it. So we went through the samples with him at the shop, and we ended up picking the port cask, which is something I never thought we would do. It's not something that's been on my radar. And I think a big part of that is port casks coming from Portugal, I don't think are often what people think they are. They're not casks that mature, tawny ports and colhitas for decades. They're casks that are used to maybe mature cheap ruby ports for just, a couple of years at best. And a lot of them are maybe not treated well. They're not maybe dumped, so they're wet filling them with whiskey. And you get these pinkish hues coming out, and they're often just not pleasant. But this Amrut, is gorgeous. This is what I want from a port cask whiskey, which is like chocolate. I want to, there's some grapey tones coming there. So they're obviously, the spirit has extracted some of those grapey fruit tones from the wood, but it doesn't have that mustiness to it. It doesn't have that kind of pink hue to it that I often get in these port casks that I just don't enjoy. It's over the top chocolatey. It's a big whiskey. It's 60%, and that's not even cask strength. They diluted that down to 60% because India's got an export tax escalator when you go above 60%. So they can't do it. Like, it would have added $50 to the bottle if we bottled this at cask strength, even if it was like 60.1% alcohol. So most of our Kavalan casks, I think, have been bottled at 60. But this is not something I thought we would bottle. I was skeptical until I nosed and tasted it. And then when I did, I was like, Ashok was right. This is an absolutely stunning cask.
Yeah, so this is the 3rd cask of Kavalan we've bottled, I believe. First one was Virgin Oak, which was just this crazy bomb in another manner. That was just fantastic, but we only got 100 bottles of it, and it definitely didn't last long when we had it. Second one was what Ashok called an ex-Jaggery rum cask, which, Andrew, that was essentially what you were talking about with Indian whiskey regulations.
Well, no,
kind of quirky as well.
It was actually a proper rum. So rum is either made from sugarcane juice or molasses, depending on where you are in the world. And in India, they make it from, Jaggery rum is made from like essentially a ball of molasses. Like, they put a ball of molasses in a fermenter and then just let the yeast do its thing. So it's actually a distinct style of rum. And I mean, it was a crazy, weird, fun, over-the-top cask. But again, it was something that Ashok teed up for us because he'd never done one for anybody before. We were the first ones to ever get a Jaggery rum matured Amrut. And it wasn't a gimmick. It was a great whiskey. But I think, like this one, even though it was like over-the-top sweet and syrupy from that rum cask, it still had those nice tropical tones that Amrut gets at an older age. This Amrut here is over 9 years of age. Just for reference, Amrut's oldest whiskeys, they're Greedy Angels, get bottled at 8, 10, and 12 years of age. So this is older than some of the Greedy Angels bottlings they do. And with the Greedy Angels, they marry down. Like, let's say it's in bourbon. After 5 years, they take 5 bourbon barrels and marry it down to 2 because they've lost that much to the Angels. This was a port pipe. A port pipe, I believe, is 600 liters, and we only got like less than 300 bottles of this. I mean, that's a very small outturn from such a massive cask. Half or more of the liquid in this cask had disappeared by the time they bottled it.
Mhm. Um, Side story on this one, referring to what you said too, Andrew. When I was at the Victoria Whiskey Festival, the last couple of years that I've been there, I've tried to do the Strath usually has a whiskey tasting there for one of the master classes, and Adam Bradshaw from the Strath, who's a great guy, puts it on. And we were trying some of the Strath's cast selections, and they had an Amrut in it. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said that the jerks at Kensington Wine Market got to try the samples first. So we were called out on that, but the Strath has a great Oloroso 7-year-old cask right now as well. That was bottled for their 20th anniversary. But yeah, glad that we did get a first stab at this one.
Well, I remember the samples that Ashley brought, and like 4 out of the 6 were things I would have been happy with.
Yeah.
But I think that's where some of this comes from, where, you Adam and the Strath have been at it for a while now, but like I've been doing this for 20 years. I've known Ashik for 19 of them, probably 18 or 19 of those years. And that's the advantage of relationships and time. So, and I mean, trust me, I don't want to burn the Strath or Adam, because I love and I have a respect for both. Like Adam's a great guy. I think what he's done at the Strath in Victoria, the Strath is the best whiskey shop in BC, hands down. Like it's not even there's no question about that. But it's just the opportunity. Now, that said, the other retailers in Alberta that got casks, I have a lot of glee about getting to pick before they do, but that's a different matter. So, anyway, Stevie, what do you think about this, the Amrut port cask?
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, I've always liked Amrut when they originally came out. I think that probably I was in Alberta at that time when they came out with Fusion.
Yeah.
And I think it was like $60 a bottle, and that was the first Amrut I tried, and I was like, this is remarkable. It was so easy drinking, and it was a factor on one of the reasons why I moved to the Okanagan, for their hot, the hot, dry climate and what they were doing in a short period of time. My only complaint is how short, I don't know if you can see that, Ashik is. So that was last year at the Victoria Whiskey Festival. And I think their innovation too, they did Spectrum, which was a fabulous whiskey, and what they did with mixing the staves. And so it's nice to see some innovation. They do such high volume, but to be doing small single casks or something like Spectrum, it's amazing. I think they're doing fantastic things with whiskey.
Well, I mean, the Spectrum is the cask that John Glazer would have made if the rules allowed.
If he was allowed, yeah.
But they don't. You can't do that in Scotland. They don't let you have that much fun in Scotland.
No, not at all.
All right. Now, Evan, should we do a speed round? We usually do a speed round.
Yeah. Well, let's. I will launch the poll, and let's go through them again.
So, the speed round, you all get a chance to vote for your favorites and/or click on whatever sarcastic question Evan has added to the poll. While you're doing that, we're going to go back through and revisit them, and then I'll put Evan and Steve Lee on the spot to pick their favorites. But yeah, we're just going to quickly go back and see how these have changed in the glass. The Glenlivet at the start, I mean, the nose on that is just so approachable. Dangerously drinkable. It's holding up remarkably well given the last 3 whiskeys, which are just so big and so rich. But yeah, it's basically jujubes now. I'm getting like jujubes and this like a buttery caramel sauce.
Yeah, mine's gone a little bit nuttier along with the fruit notes coming back to it as well. But it does have still that. I'm not always a fan of that dunnage note on sort of that. It seems to come in, especially in Speyside whiskeys, in the mid-20s, age-wise, especially in refill casks. But this one, I think, just brings a little bit more nuance to it that I really enjoy.
Speaking of coming in, Evan, I'm just noticing that there's a little gray coming in on the chin there.
Oh, it shows more in person, let me tell you.
Stevie, do you want to participate in the speed round? Do you have a?
Oh, we're not talking about gray anymore? I was just trying.
No, well, we can talk about gray if you want.
And that's why I'm wearing a hat all the time.
I mean, are you still in the boutique there? I was certainly picking out a bit more of the grain note was starting to come through as it's sitting in the glass there.
Yeah, cool. All right, on to the Craigellachie now. It's very waxy now and very fruity.
Yeah.
Those are the two most prominent notes for me. A little bit of a cheesy funk, like something like an aged Gouda, like one of those like really old Gouda cheeses.
Just for me, like biting into a nectarine right on the nose right now reminds me of that.
That's something that we both know I wouldn't do because of the whole ADD thing. Gotta eat my fruit in condensed, dehydrated form.
Yeah, you'll just have to take my word for it, man.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it. Steve Lee?
I think it's more peachy than nectarine, actually.
Ooh,
so I know they're
nice.
probably a little closer, but yeah, I get a big peach note out of that.
I like that. Okay. Glentauchers, or no, Glen Moray. We're still on the Glen Moray. Still very floral. And very kind of honey, like honey butter on the palate.
Yeah, it's going chocolate cake for me, like chocolate cake and chocolate icing.
Wish I had some chocolate cake in my future. I don't. Probably don't need it. Steve Lee?
Yeah, I'm getting that chocolate note as well, but with a bit of caramel sauce on top there.
Very good.
A little bit of sweetness.
Glentauchers.
This one kind of disappeared on me, and I was really looking forward to this one because this is actually the most time I've spent with this one so far since it came out around December. Haven't had much time with it, but it's got a little bit of a grapefruit note coming through for me right now that I quite enjoy.
For me, it's big time citrus. Like it reminds me of the dregs of like an old fashioned cocktail where you've got the orange rind, the sugar, a little bit of whiskey in there as well too. Steve Lee?
Stale Kool-Aid, does that count?
Stale, back to the Kool-Aid.
I can't get it out of my mind. I still pick up that kind of fruity Kool-Aid note.
So Steve Lee, are the crystals stale or is the liquid stale because it was like filled too long ago?
It's almost like flat. Like when I had it earlier, it was a little bit more vibrant, and now it's just a little bit dulled down, a little bit softer, but it still has that underlying fruit note.
Yeah, I don't think the crystals can go stale. I think they have a half-life, don't they?
They'll outlive us, that's for sure.
That's right.
All right, I don't get to play with this one, but how's the Dailuaine holding up?
Nice. Yeah, still has that nice waxy note. Still goes into those bakery and pastry notes for me in a really cool manner.
Kind of a sweet caramel. Almost like those old plastic wrapped caramels.
Going to Granny,
sweet.
But maybe Granny would have taken them out of the wrappers and put them in a bowl.
Yeah.
And then you have to chisel them off
the bowl.
Get one loose.
Don't ruin that crystal though. You'll be in trouble.
I don't think my granny had crystal, but anyway. All right, I'm on to the Arran. Man, this is like just rich chocolate leather on the nose, loads of dark fruit. Palate, frankly, more of the same. I mean, to be honest, if I was poured this blind, I'd be surprised that this is just a 9-year-old. Like young sherry whiskeys like this are often like really raw, really rough. There's no rough edges to this. It's warm, it's spicy, it's earthy, but it's got a nice balance.
It's got a nice like hint of acidity to it, I find too, where it's like not full on into balsamic notes, which sometimes happens with sherry, but like cranberry juice for me on the finish.
Oh, cranberry juice. Steve Lee?
Bit of licorice and kind of spice notes. I kind of regret now. It's really softer, and I think probably because I added a little bit of water to this. It's not as vibrant as it was before I added the water. I mean, I enjoyed it when I added the water, but now I feel I want to go back to the cask strength.
Steve Lee, I feel like you're helping like justify one of my prejudices, which is that sherry cask in water doesn't work. I could be wrong, maybe for like analytical purposes, but for enjoyment purposes, I don't think it works. But that's not scientific. It's purely based on like lots and lots of experience. So, but I don't know.
Lots and lots of it. Didn't you guys just win the Whiskey Explorer Awards, best retailer in Canada as well?
We did.
Yeah.
Very honored and humbled by that. Feel especially guilty that Mike sent me an email and I didn't click on it and vote, but Evan knows what my email inbox is like, so it's a never-ending battle.
Well, Andrew, you're the reason Strath didn't win. So thank you for that.
I'm the reason Strath didn't win. Well, I'll read something into that, I'm sure. Kavalan?
Still love the balance on this between the tropical and the sherry.
This is frankly what Macallan should be most of the time.
Yep.
And that's awesome. You know, it's the youngest whiskey in the lineup, and it's probably one of the most elegant in the whole range. So, Steve Lee, Kavalan?
Yeah, a bit of kind of leather and just kind of licorice roots. I'm getting some strong licorice notes out of the sherry casks tonight. I'm not sure why, but all of them have a bit of a licorice, or the two of them have a bit of a licorice note out of it.
You know, you're right. For me, I think the Arran was more licorice root. This is more like Panda brand licorice. I don't know if you've had that. It's the Aussie one that comes in these little logs and they're wet. Like that's the Kavalan is more like that wet Panda brand licorice, as opposed to the sort of that woodier licorice root from the Arran.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, Steve Lee, sometimes you can get into Dutch licorice or German licorice.
Yeah,
Salty.
It's almost like S&M. It's a whole other world.
that's got this slight PVC note, and you nose chains of some sort on it too. Yeah, the Amrut still, we could have had like 4 peated whiskeys before this, and it still would have been last in the lineup just because it's so big.
I still can't wrap my head around this being a port cask whiskey and that I actually like it as much as I do. So anyway, all right, Evan, I'm going to put you on the spot first. You got to have 2 favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, we'll let you have 3. We always let the hosts have 3, just so they can, you know, make an easier decision. Your top 3.
I am going to go with the Amrut being my top right now, Arran being second, and I'm gonna go with the first one, the boutique 24-year-old Speyside, as my third. I just love the balance on that one, and it creeps in even against bigger whiskeys. Just a nicely done, like not necessarily understated, but it doesn't shout itself from the rooftops whiskey.
Very cool. Steve Lee, what are your favorites tonight?
I've liked the Glen Moray all night long. I've gone back to it. I really love the nose, so I'm going to say that's my first one. And the toss-up would be between the second or third is the Amrut or the Kavalan. And I really found the Amrut, when I went back to it, that port nose really shines through as it sits there. So yeah, those would be number 2 equally.
My favorite's the Craigellachie. I love that style. I like things that are also a little bit weird. You know, we joke about this in tastings every once in a while, but it's like sometimes you get that smell where you're not sure if you like it or not, but you can't stop smelling it, kind of thing. Like there's something about that I really like about that Craigellachie. So that's my favorite. If I was going by drinkability, I think I would then go Speyside, Glenlivet, Glen Moray, but I'm actually, for my favorites tonight's lineup, I'm actually going to go Craigellachie, Kavalan, Amrut.
Cool.
And I'm not normally at that deep end of the pool anymore. Like I like the light and delicate stuff, but those were the ones that were speaking to me most. So the results, the people have spoken. Steve Lee, they're in tune with you. The Glen Moray and the Arran were the standouts for first favorite tonight. And then everybody gets a vote after that, which is kind of cool. You gotta love that. For second favorites, the Amrut storms to the front. And I think if we were to aggregate these numbers, the Amrut would almost probably be in first, but it definitely won second favorite by a fair bit, with the Arran and the boutique Speyside coming in a respectable second. But yeah, very, very cool. I don't know if anyone's got any other questions or comments. Steve Lee, do you have some closing business, or we can kill the live feed maybe before that if you had anything else you wanted to go through. But
no, we just want to thank you for doing the tasting. I think normally Crystal does the thanks. But yeah, we appreciate having such a fabulous lineup of whiskey. And I know when you visit us in person, and the stories that both you and Evan have that you bring to the tasting makes the tasting more personal, and it's certainly appreciated. I think the accolades that Kensington Wine Market gets, like winning awards for Canadian Whiskey Retailer, or was it a couple of years ago you won World Whiskey Retailer of the Year? We've seen you in second place lots.
We were second place a couple times. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, those things are, and to your point about the Whiskey Explorer Awards, that was all apparently just like 2,000 people across Canada that voted for that. So thank you to anyone who voted for that. Because we know we're not the BCLDB or the LCBO or Liquor Depot, or we don't ship across the country like some other people do, but we just try to be ourselves and true to that. And the fact that people like that is awesome. So we definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, we're kind of a warts and all. Yeah. We're kind of a warts and all shop where we have trouble keeping secrets from people, and we don't really try to as well. Like at the end of the day, we're doing this because we love whiskey. That's the whole reason I started working Kensington Wine Market 8 years ago. And Andrew, beyond his love for IPAs, which I mentioned in his bio, he is the reason that the whiskey well's there. Yeah, West Coast IPAs, pardon me. It's got to be bitter.
San Diego 2011.
Yeah. But we do this because we love it. And we just happen to get paid for it, which is a pretty rare thing that you can get to do, where you get to have your career built around something that's started as a hobby, at least for me. But I'd be talking about whiskey with my wife outside, and she'd be just rolling her eyes if it wasn't for this. So this allows me to vent and be myself a little bit with my hobby too, which is cool.
Mine's probably listening to this, rolling her eyes upstairs right now.
And if people didn't know, like Andrew here, when we first started out at the distillery here, Andrew came and there's a Kensington wine. Well, it's empty now. It's being proofed down. Andrew purchased a barrel here at the distillery right when we started out, and he drove that. I'm trying to remember what where did that cask come from?
It was a Wyoming. Was it a Wyoming?
No, I think that was the Bernheim.
Yeah. Bernheim, that's right. So the Bernheim whiskey barrel that Andrew drove up in his Volvo here, and came here and spent the day at the distillery, and we worked him, and so we worked him pretty hard. So it was fantastic. So Andrew became a part of the whole process. When here we had him even painting the end of the barrel, and that whiskey barrel, that cask, will be the first whiskey that'll be available in Alberta, hopefully coming this spring. So which we're bottling at 50% ABV. So it goes to show that Andrew is jumped in on a number of craft distilleries, not the big ones, but has supported a lot of the small guys as well and recognized the industry as it's been changing. So we're fortunate to have been recognized for that, and I'm excited about getting that Kensington Wine Market cask in a bottle.
She's too polite to have jumped in, but I unmuted Crystal because I didn't realize that was her job, was to thank. Now, Crystal, you don't have to do that, but
Yeah.
I'm curious what your favorites were in the lineup tonight, because you've been immersed in whiskey now for quite a while.
It was a really hard decision as to what was my favorite, and didn't quite have enough time to speed through before voting, but I still think the Dailuaine and the Amrut port pipe are my favorite too. I put the Dailuaine as first. I swapped them around. The Glentauchers I really enjoyed as well. And trying the Arran again. Yeah, there was lots of tasty whiskeys here. So thank you again, both Evan and Andrew, for doing this tasting for us, and like amazingly packaging up these little mini bottles for us. And a lot of the guys were very appreciative to not have to be doing that here at the distillery with Steve Lee.
You know what? It was a win-win because it kept some of our people busy on an otherwise quiet day. So, but I mean, it's a point worth mentioning. You know, we do tastings like this almost every week. Not exactly like this, but different. And the reason we do it is we've got people across Canada that want to take part in interesting tastings. And I assure you, if you take part in one of our tastings, it's because we've put the lineup together because we want to try things. And we like to think if we're interested in something, other people probably will be too. And I guess the last thing I would kind of like to say about my shop and what we do is, we'll never rip you off on anything. We're not going to be always the cheapest place to buy X, but we never, like, we're all about relationships and long-term business and loyalty. And you know, we know people buy from other people, and maybe, you know, you've got your buddy who gets you access to X, and that's cool. We're not really into that. And I think when I started out by saying, like, we just want to sell you the things that we have that no one else has. And we've got like hundreds of those things because that's our bread and butter. That's what we do. And all of those things are cool and interesting because we're whiskey nerds at heart at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So
yeah. One final thing on that too is to agree with Andrew is, like, you got Andrew and my comments on this. We're very lucky and very privileged to have an extensive whiskey staff as well. Like, Kurt wasn't in on this tasting, Harmony wasn't in on this tasting, Sammy wasn't in on this tasting. We have some people, Marty wasn't in on this tasting as well, but we have a great staff, and you come into the shop and you tell us what you're looking for, and if we have the time, we'll likely pour you something to try. And it's usually going to be not the thing that we need to sell, but the thing that we love, and that we want you to love as well. So we are very passionate about what we do, and we don't always agree on what the greatest whiskey is, but that's why there's a giant wall to pick from.
And there's a few Lechegs on there for Evan. So
that's right. That's right. That's what I'll be pouring you.
Kevin, you know what? Just send Evan or I an email, or if you don't have our email, send it to Steve Lee. We'll get back to you. Sort of, yes. We pour our tastings 6 to 8 weeks before they happen, so people can get them. So we'll figure it out. Probably not something we want to promote on the internet, but regardless. Anyway, Steve Lee, huge thank you to you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you.
Giving us an opportunity to talk to all your members. You know, and Crystal, nice to see you. Like, nice to see like Taylor and several other people, you know, who maybe I bump into once or twice a year. Yeah, we whether it's us or stores like the Strath, like, please support the independent retailers because they often have the coolest stuff. People just don't know what it is, and go in there and they'll romance you on it. So I think that's probably as good as spot as any to stop on. So
Mhm.
thanks everybody.